When Will walked into the Spencer estate with a folder pressed tightly against his chest, the house felt like a cathedral before confession, a place where silence carried the weight of guilt that had not yet been named. The folder, thick and trembling in his hand, contained not business contracts or financial projections, but something far more explosive. Luna's complete medical record, printed in stark, merciless detail. The name Luna Nozawa was written at the top in clean black ink, followed by words that would alter everything the Spencers believed about themselves. Stage 4 metastatic carcinoma. Beneath that, a line that froze Will's blood every time he saw it. Fetal death due to trauma sustained during incarceration. For weeks he had read those words in private, staring until they blurred into shapes he could no longer distinguish from nightmares. But tonight, he would not bear that truth alone. His father and mother would face it too. Bill and Katie were sitting in the living room when he entered. The fire in the marble hearth flickered against the edges of their disagreement, Bill pacing restlessly, Katie's hands folded in her lap, the tension between them as sharp as glass. For months, Luna's name had been a wound they refused to touch. Now Will was going to tear it open. He dropped the folder onto the glass table, and the impact echoed through the room. Bill frowned. "What is this?" he asked, his voice clipped, but Will didn't answer. He only said, "Read it." When Bill flipped open the first page, his face drained of color. The medical notes detailed Luna's deterioration, her weight loss, her internal bleeding, the lab reports showing aggressive tumors in her liver and lungs. Katie reached for the second page, her eyes catching the line about the pregnancy, about the terminated fetal viability due to blunt force trauma. She froze. For a moment, all three of them could hear only the sound of the fire crackling, the paper rustling, and their own hearts pounding. Will's voice broke the silence. "That's what happened to her. The girl you wanted gone, the girl everyone called manipulative, criminal, dangerous, she was dying. And the baby she carried, my child or grandchild, died in her womb because no one believed her." His words struck with surgical precision, cutting through the air until even Bill couldn't find a retort. Katie's lips trembled. She turned toward her husband, her eyes wide and horrified, as if she were seeing him for the first time. Bill looked down at the papers again, his jaw tightening. For years, he had navigated scandals, boardroom betrayals, corporate wars. Nothing ever truly shook him. But this was different. The documents described Luna not as the villain he had painted her to be, but as a victim of negligence, violence, and systemic cruelty. He had always told himself she was dangerous because it was easier than admitting he had misjudged her. When Will had fallen for her, Bill had reacted as a man protecting his legacy, not as a father protecting his son. He had called her toxic, manipulative, a threat. He had even entertained private conversations with advisors about ensuring she disappeared quietly from their lives, a euphemism he'd told himself was only metaphorical, though deep down he knew it wasn't. Katie buried her face in her hands. She remembered the nights Will had argued with them, defending Luna, insisting she was misunderstood. She remembered telling him that love could blind him to danger. Now she felt that same blindness swallowing her. The words fetal death burned behind her eyelids. Luna had been pregnant. Pregnant with a Spencer child. And instead of protection, they had offered suspicion, isolation, hostility. She could almost hear Luna's voice in her head, tired, trembling, yet full of grace as she confessed to Will that she loved him, that the night they shared had been the only moment in her life that felt pure. Will's anger erupted not as fire, but as cold precision. He told them everything, the confession, the beach, the moment she tried to drown herself wearing the dress he had once praised. He described how she had whispered that she wanted to die because the pain of cancer and loss had consumed her, how she had said that the memory of their night together was the only thing that still made her smile. He told them how he had fought to save her, how he had turned the Spencer Beach into an emergency field hospital, how he had called every doctor within 1,000 miles. "You raised me to fight for what I believe in," he said. "So that's what I'm doing. I'm fighting for her." Bill's fists clenched. "You're fighting for Ghost," he snapped, though his voice lacked conviction. Will's reply was immediate.
No.
I'm fighting for a woman you helped destroy. The words hit harder than he intended, but he didn't pull back. You called her a liar. You said she made up the assault to manipulate sympathy. You didn't care that she was pregnant. You just wanted her gone because she didn't fit your version of who I should love. Bill turned away, his reflection flickering in the window's glass, caught between rage and regret. He remembered the night Luna had shown up at Spencer Publications, trembling and tear-streaked, claiming she had been attacked by a guard in prison. He had dismissed her as hysterical, accused her of fabricating a story to escape sentencing. He had watched her leave his office without looking back, and something inside him, something cold and certain, had whispered that she wouldn't last long. Now that certainty sickened him. Katie finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Well, what are you asking us to do? He looked at her with a kind of desperate calm. I'm not asking. I'm telling you. I'm going to use every resource we have to save her. The doctors think there's a chance, experimental treatment, immunotherapy, maybe even surgery if we move fast. I need funding approvals, hospital access, legal clearance. And I need both of you to stop treating her like a mistake. Bill turned sharply. And if she dies anyway? What then, Will? You ruin the family name for a lost cause. Will stepped closer, his voice trembling with restrained fury. If she dies, at least I'll know I didn't kill her with silence. The room felt smaller, suffocating under the weight of everything unsaid. Katie looked between them, the father clinging to control and the son clinging to redemption, and felt herself splitting apart. She had always seen Will as her heart, Bill as her strength, and now both stood ready to destroy each other for a woman whose face she couldn't stop picturing pale and broken in a hospital bed. Later that night, when Will left to meet with the medical team, Bill poured himself a drink and stared into the fire. The flames danced like ghosts of his past mistakes. He remembered the first time he had seen Luna, a sharp, beautiful woman who carried danger like perfume. He had distrusted her instantly, sensing the chaos she might bring. But now, with the truth carved across those medical reports, he saw something else. Not a threat, but a mirror. She was the embodiment of everything the Spencers feared: vulnerability, loss, imperfection, and they had punished her for it. Katie joined him by the window, her expression soft but haunted. He's not wrong, she said quietly. We wanted her gone. We told ourselves it was for his own good, but maybe it was just for ours. Bill didn't answer. The words hung between them like smoke. She continued, You always say family comes first. But if we choose to turn our backs on Luna now, on what's left of her, what kind of family are we? For the first time in his life, Bill Spencer didn't have an answer. Over the following days, the Spencer estate turned into a command center. Lawyers called at all hours. Doctors came and went. Reporters camped outside the gates, demanding statements about the woman who divided the Spencers. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Will worked tirelessly, coordinating medical transfers, consulting oncologists, petitioning the governor for medical clemency. Katie hovered in quiet support, torn between pride and dread. Bill watched, increasingly restless, trapped between love for his son and the fear of what this crusade would cost them all. He saw the toll it took on Will, how his once confident son now moved like a man possessed, his eyes bloodshot, his voice raw from sleepless nights. But he also saw something new in him. Conviction. Luna had ignited a fire in Will that no corporate title ever could. It terrified Bill because he recognized that fire. It was the same reckless devotion that had once driven him to build the Spencer empire, and the same fire that had burned everyone who stood too close. When Will finally brought Luna home to the private facility they had built by the coast, Katie went to see her. She didn't know what to expect, perhaps bitterness, perhaps resentment, but Luna only looked at her with quiet exhaustion. Her face was thinner, her hair cropped short from chemotherapy, her eyes luminous with a strange peace. You're Will's mother, Luna said softly, her voice fragile as wind. Katie nodded. Yes. Luna smiled faintly. He loves you. He talks about you when he thinks I'm asleep. That simple sentence broke something in Katie. She realized then that Luna was not the monster she had imagined, but a woman who had already made peace with her suffering, while the rest of them were still running from theirs. Bill visited a week later, standing at the edge of her bed like a man approaching a battlefield. He wanted to say something, apology, perhaps, but the words refused to come. Luna looked at him and said, "I don't hate you." It stunned him. He asked why, and she answered, "Because Will still has a father." "I never did." Those words struck deeper than any accusation could. Bill left her room without speaking, but that night, he wired a quiet donation to the research foundation handling her treatment under an anonymous name. As the weeks passed, Luna's condition wavered between fragile improvement and inevitable decline. The family fractured under the strain. Will's love became obsession, Bill's guilt became silence, Katie's compassion became sleeplessness. The house echoed with unspoken fears, the fear that Luna would die, and the equal fear of what it would mean if she lived. Because if she lived, the world would know the truth, that the Spencers, a family built on power, had nearly destroyed a dying woman carrying their blood. The climax came one stormy night when Will confronted his parents again. Luna's vitals had crashed. Doctors said she might not make it through the night. Will demanded they come see her, but Bill refused. He said he couldn't watch another person he loved die. "Then you'll watch me die instead," Will said, his voice trembling. "Because if she goes, the man you call your son goes with her." That broke Katie completely. She grabbed Bill's hand and forced him toward the car. They arrived at the hospital just as the monitors screamed. Luna's chest rose weakly, her breath shallow, but when she saw them through the glass, she smiled. It wasn't forgiveness she offered, it was release. Bill stepped forward, his hand on the glass, his reflection merging with hers. "We're here," he whispered, as if saying it could undo the past. She survived that night, barely. The next morning, Bill called a press conference. His voice, steady but weighted with shame, announced the establishment of the Luna Foundation, a medical and legal initiative for incarcerated women. For the first time in his career, he didn't spin the truth. He told the world about Luna's illness, her unborn child, the violence she had endured. He said, "We failed her, but we won't fail others." When Will heard those words, he finally exhaled. Katie wept quietly beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. Luna, from her hospital bed, watched the broadcast through tears. For once, she didn't feel like a ghost haunting the Spencer name. She felt seen, acknowledged, alive. The battle for her body continued, but the war for her soul, and theirs, had already been won. Luna's life hung in the balance, suspended between the mercy of medicine and the will of those who once condemned her. But whether she lived or died, the truth had rewritten everything. She was no longer the villain of the Spencer story. She was its mirror, its conscience, its redemption. And in the quiet that followed, as Will sat beside her hospital bed holding her hand, he whispered the words that had begun this war and would one day end it. "You will not die a criminal, Luna. You'll live as what you always were, someone worth saving." When the recording leaked, it did not sound like a confession. It sounded like the last breath of a woman who had already died in her heart long before anyone realized it. The world heard Luna's voice not as a villain, not as a prisoner, not even as a scandal, but as something achingly human. It began softly, almost whispering, her tone uneven, trembling as though she were speaking to herself rather than to Will. "They said it's terminal," she said between shallow breaths. "The doctor told me the baby's gone. I don't want to keep fighting. I just want it to stop. But before I go, I want you to know I loved you, Will. That night, we were real. It was the only thing in my life that was ever right." Then silence, long and suffocating, before a faint sob and the sound of the sea somewhere far away. The file ended there, but the echo of those words tore through Los Angeles like wildfire. Within hours, it was everywhere, on social media, on every major news outlet, whispered on every street corner. Luna Nozawa's dying confession had become public property. The reaction was instant and brutal. The public split into two warring factions, each desperate to claim the truth as their own. One side, fueled by cynicism and old headlines, painted Luna as a master manipulator. They argued that the recording was an act, a last-ditch attempt by a convicted criminal to twist public sympathy and exploit Will Spencer's name. They dissected her tone, her pauses, her choice of words, treating them like evidence in a trial. Commentators on late-night talk shows sneered that Luna knew exactly how to sound fragile, how to weaponize emotion. Memes surfaced mocking her sweet night confession, turning her pain into entertainment. To them, Luna was dangerous precisely because she made people feel something, and feeling in a world like theirs was weakness. But the other side, quieter at first and then deafening, saw something different. They heard the fatigue in her voice, the surrender of someone who had carried too much for too long. They remembered that she had been assaulted in prison, that her claims had been dismissed, that she had been branded a liar before anyone even looked for proof. They saw her as a casualty of a system that protected the powerful and punished the broken. Feminist groups, human rights activists, and advocates for prison reform flooded the streets with signs that read justice for Luna. They demanded accountability, not just for her, but for every woman who had been silenced behind concrete walls. To them, Luna wasn't just a woman dying of cancer. She was a symbol of everything wrong with a society that called cruelty justice. And at the center of the storm was Will. In the beginning, he tried to stay silent. But silence, when you're a Spencer, is a language the press knows how to weaponize. Within days, his name dominated every headline. Did Will Spencer exploit a dying woman? Did he know about the pregnancy? Was the sweet night consent or control? The questions were designed not to seek truth, but to provoke outrage. Reporters camped outside his office, his home, even the hospital where Luna was being treated. Drones hovered over the property lines, desperate for a glimpse of the dying woman whose story had consumed the city. Every move he made, every expression he wore, was analyzed, torn apart, repurposed into someone else's version of the truth. Will's phone never stopped buzzing. His PR team begged him to issue a statement distancing himself from Luna, to frame the relationship as a tragic misstep rather than a love story. Bill Spencer, his father, called him repeatedly, his voice alternating between fury and fear. "You have no idea what you've started," Bill said. "You're turning this family into a circus. You think you're saving her, but you're drowning us all." Katie, his mother, was softer but no less afraid. She urged him to protect himself, to think about his future. But every plea, every warning only deepened the quiet rebellion growing inside him. Because when Will listened to that recording, when he heard her voice break as she said his name, he didn't hear manipulation. He heard truth. Raw, painful, unfiltered truth. The truth of a woman who had been broken in ways no one could understand, who had found a fleeting moment of beauty and had clung to it like a prayer. And he heard something else, his own guilt, echoed back at him through her trembling confession. Days later, Will agreed to an exclusive interview, not to clear his name, but to speak for her. The network called it the Spencer Confession, the man behind the recording. The studio was stark, clinical, cold lights, white chairs, a single microphone between him and the host. The audience was unseen, but Will could feel their eyes through the cameras, waiting to see whether he would flinch, whether he would betray the emotion that had made the Spencers untouchable for generations. The interviewer wasted no time. "Mr. Spencer, people are saying Luna manipulated you, that she used her illness to gain your sympathy. Others say you abandoned her and your unborn child.
What do you say to that?"
Will inhaled slowly. "I say you're asking the wrong question. What's the right one?" He looked directly into the lens, his voice calm but steady. Why did she feel she had to die to be heard? The room fell silent. For a moment, even the producer hesitated before cueing the next question. Will continued, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had crossed the threshold between privilege and truth. "You can think whatever you want about me, about her, but that recording wasn't an act. It was the sound of a human being who lost everything: her child, her health, her faith in the world. And we all let it happen. I let it happen. The interviewer pressed him about the pregnancy, about whether he believed the child was his. Will didn't hesitate. I don't need a DNA test to know what kind of man I want to be. If that child had lived, it would have carried my name. And I'll carry that loss until I die. The clip went viral within hours. Some called it performative. Others called it redemption. But no one could deny its power. For the first time, the Spencers, the dynasty of polished image and ruthless business, had bared something human. Behind the scenes, the fallout was immediate. Corporate partners threatened to withdraw. Stock prices dipped. Bill Spencer convened emergency meetings, furious that one son's emotion could endanger an empire built over decades. But Will didn't care. The more they tried to silence him, the louder he became. He took the stage at public hearings, sat before committees investigating prison abuses, and testified about Luna's treatment. Each time, he refused to read from prepared statements. He spoke from memory, from guilt, from love. "You call her a criminal," he said once to a panel of officials. "But I call her proof that compassion is still possible, even in a place designed to destroy it." His defiance infuriated his father. One night, the two men faced each other in the Spencer penthouse, the city's lights sprawling beneath them like judgment. Bill accused him of throwing away everything for a woman who didn't want to live. Will's response was quiet but lethal. "You built this empire on control, Dad. But what's the point of control if it costs you your soul?" Katie watched helplessly as father and son tore into each other, both driven by love, but in opposite directions. Bill wanted to protect the family. Will wanted to protect the truth. And Luna, whether she lived or died, had become the fulcrum of their war. Meanwhile, Luna herself remained suspended between worlds. The hospital where she lay had become both refuge and prison. Every morning, she woke to find flowers outside her door, some from supporters, some from haters. Her name trended daily. Her face appeared on magazine covers under contradictory headlines. Fallen angel or mastermind? The dying woman who divided Los Angeles. She stopped watching the news after the third day, unable to bear the noise. But sometimes, late at night, when the nurses thought she was asleep, she would listen to the radio. She would hear fragments of her own voice, the confession that had escaped her control, and she would weep silently, both horrified and strangely relieved. For the first time, people believed her pain. But they had also stolen it. When Will visited, she pretended to be strong. He would sit beside her bed, reading her messages from supporters, updates about the foundation he was creating in her name. "They want to help," he told her. "They want to fight for you." But she only smiled faintly. "They don't even know me," she whispered. "They know a voice, a tragedy, a ghost." Still, something in her began to shift. For months, she had wanted nothing more than death, a clean end to the suffering. But now, with the world watching, with Will refusing to let go, she found herself caught in an unfamiliar war between resignation and hope. Each new letter, each act of kindness from strangers who saw her not as a monster but as a human being, chipped away at her certainty that life had nothing left to offer. She began to imagine, however briefly, the possibility of surviving, not as redemption, but as defiance. The turning point came when Will announced at a public charity gala that he would personally fund all of Luna's medical expenses, regardless of her legal status. The moment was televised live. Cameras flashed as he stood at the podium, his voice trembling with emotion. "She doesn't owe society her death," he said. "She deserves a chance to live, not as a prisoner, not as a headline, but as a woman." He paused, scanning the crowd. "And if our system can't offer her that chance, then I will." The crowd erupted, some in applause, others in outrage. Bill sat in the front row, his face unreadable, while Katie wept quietly beside him. By the next morning, Will's words had rewritten the narrative. The debate was no longer about Luna's guilt or innocence. It was about humanity itself, about whether compassion could exist without condition. For the next weeks, Los Angeles became a city divided by a single question: does a life still have value when the world has already condemned it? On talk shows, philosophers argued with politicians. On the streets, people painted murals of Luna's face, half in shadow, half in light. Religious leaders called her suffering a parable of forgiveness. Skeptics called it a distraction from deeper corruption. But whether people hated or adored her, no one could look away. Luna's story had become a mirror, reflecting not who she was, but who everyone else was when confronted with someone broken beyond repair. And through it all, Will stood unyielding. He faced lawsuits, media backlash, even threats. Yet when asked if he regretted anything, his answer never changed. No. Because she taught me what truth sounds like when it's dying. In her hospital room, Luna listened to that interview. For the first time, she didn't feel like fading away. She thought of the night she had confessed, the trembling words that had escaped her like a prayer, and realized they were no longer hers alone. They belonged to every person who had ever been silenced, every soul who had ever wanted to die, but found a reason